My name is Marley Dawson. I am 34 years old, and last Thursday I stood in a Honolulu courtroom while my parents tried to erase me. The air conditioning hummed above us, pushing the smell of lemon floor wax and my father's expensive cologne through the heavy room. My father, Thomas, adjusted his custom silk tie. My mother, Barbara, pressed a tissue to her cheek, careful not to smudge her makeup. She did not shed a single tear. They had dragged me before a judge to legally evict me, sue me for $100,000 in fabricated property damage, and strip away the last remaining connection I had to my grandfather. They wanted a public execution. When the judge asked if they had any final statements, my father leaned into the microphone. His voice echoed off the wood paneling. Her no degree, no job. She is the biggest mistake of our lives. The gallery sat packed with their wealthy friends from the local country club. At my father's words, the room erupted in mocking laughter. The sound hit my back like a handful of gravel. My mother offered a tight, satisfied smile to the women sitting in the front row. They expected me to shatter right there on the polished floor. They expected the quiet, invisible daughter to lower her head and weep in shame. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice. I simply stood up, buttoned my plain navy blazer, and picked up a single red folder from the defense table. Your Honor, I said, my voice cutting clean through the laughter, before this goes any further, there is something my parents do not want you to know. The judge stopped moving. His gavel hovered above the sounding block. At the plaintiff's table, my parents' high-priced lawyer went pale. His hands went slack, and a stack of manila files slipped from his grip, scattering across the floor. He had just seen the document resting on top of my folder, and he realized exactly who I was. I ended their entire facade with 3 simple sentences. I am going to tell you exactly how I dismantled my family's empire. But before we get to the moment that cost them everything, welcome to Grape Vengeance. If you have ever been the family scapegoat, the one who does all the heavy lifting while someone else gets the praise, tell me your age and where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe to hear how ordinary people answer loud cruelty with cold, calculated paperwork. To understand the trap Thomas and Barbara Dawson set for themselves, you have to understand the 10 years of quiet, invisible survival that built the weapon I used against them. Growing up on the island of Oahu paints a very specific picture for outsiders. Tourists imagine endless sunsets, warm breezes, and easy living. But paradise has a back door, and my family lived firmly behind it. My parents, Thomas and Barbara, operated on a strict currency of appearances. In their house, you were only as valuable as the image you projected to the local country club. There were 2 daughters under that roof, but they only ever truly raised one. My younger sister, Lauren, was the undisputed golden child. She won her first beauty pageant at 6 years old, and from that moment on, my mother treated her like a fragile investment. Lauren attended an elite private academy. She took expensive tennis lessons. She never once heard the word no cross my father's lips. I was the quiet one. I existed in the margins of our home, wearing thrifted clothes while watching my mother zip Lauren into custom-tailored dresses. I did not complain. I assumed my role was to stay out of the way. While Lauren practiced interview questions for pageant judges, I found my sanctuary near the docks. My grandfather, Kimo, ran a modest shipping fleet out of Honolulu Harbor. He was a man made of calluses and salt water, wearing faded canvas shirts and carrying a clipboard everywhere he went. Kimo did not care about country club memberships. He cared about hard work, and he noticed that I possessed plenty of it. He let me sit in his cramped, humid office overlooking the water. While the diesel engines idled outside, he handed me old financial ledgers. He taught me how to read balance sheets, how to track inventory, and how to spot a missing dollar hidden inside a column of expenses. He treated me like a capable human being, which felt like a revelation. One humid Tuesday afternoon, Kimo tapped his thick finger against a misaligned column on a cargo manifest. He looked at me with his dark, weathered eyes. "Numbers don't lie, Marley," he told me, his voice rough from years of breathing ocean air. "People do. You learn the math, and nobody can ever trick you." I took those words and anchored my entire soul to them. When I turned 18, Chemo passed away. His heart gave out in his sleep. The funeral was heavily attended by dock workers and local sailors, men who respected him deeply. My parents treated the service like a networking event. A few weeks after we buried him, my father called me into our kitchen. He stood near the sink sipping coffee, refusing to meet my gaze. He told me Chemo had left the entire shipping fleet and all his assets to the family business to be managed by Thomas himself. He claimed Chemo left no individual provisions for me. I stood there listening to my father's steady voice. Something cold twisted in my stomach. Chemo had spent years showing me his ledgers. He operated with meticulous precision. Leaving his legacy unshielded in my father's hands contradicted every lesson he ever taught me. But I was 18. I had no lawyer, no funds, and no leverage to demand the truth. I swallowed my suspicion and nodded. What I did not know then was that Chemo had set up a small, sealed trust solely in my name. My parents hid the paperwork. They buried the legal documents deep inside their own filing cabinets, legally required to disperse the funds, but choosing instead to starve me out. They wanted the capital for their own lifestyle, and they viewed my inheritance as their rightful property. The financial starvation began immediately. When the time came for college, my mother sat at the dining table and folded her hands. She explained with a practiced frown that business was tight. They could not spare a single dollar for my tuition. The very next morning, a flatbed truck pulled into our driveway delivering a brand new Mercedes tied with a giant red bow. It was Lauren's high school graduation present. I watched my sister squeal and hug my father. I looked at the gleaming silver paint. I did not shed a tear. I simply turned around, walked to the local diner down the street, and filled out an application for a waitressing shift. I worked 3 jobs for the next 4 years. I served breakfast at the diner, starting at 4 in the morning. I folded towels at a resort laundry facility during the day. I stocked shelves at a grocery store until midnight. My feet blistered. My back ached. I saved every crumpled tip, every crumpled dollar bill, hoarding my earnings in a shoebox hidden under my bed. I paid my own tuition at the state university. I studied tax law and corporate finance on the bus rides between shifts. I earned my accounting degree in total silence. Nobody from my family attended my graduation. I walked across the stage, took my diploma, and went straight to my evening shift. Despite the neglect, I remained desperate for their approval. It is a harsh reality to face, but children starved of affection will often endure terrible treatment just to earn a crumb of validation. I thought my degree would finally make them proud. Instead, it only made me convenient. My father realized he had a certified accountant living under his roof. He began dropping thick stacks of chaotic receipts and business expenses on my desk. "Sort this out," he would dictate, walking away without offering compensation. I spent my weekends untangling their disastrous tax filings. I balanced the books for the shipping fleet my father was slowly running into the ground. I caught vendor overcharges. I saved them thousands of dollars in audit penalties. I did it all for free. I became a piece of broken furniture in their house, ignored until they needed something to lean on, embarrassing to show off to their elite friends, but too useful to throw away. My mother would host lavish dinner parties serving expensive imported wine and tell me to stay in the back office so I wouldn't disrupt the aesthetic of her evening. I sat in the dark, crunching numbers, assuming my relentless dedication would eventually soften their hearts. I believed that if I proved my worth through sheer utility, they would look at me and finally see a daughter. I was entirely wrong. They did not want a daughter. They wanted a servant. The harder I worked, the more they demanded, and the less they offered in return. The gap between Lauren's pampered existence and my grinding reality grew wider every passing year. I spent a decade swallowing their casual cruelty, paying my own way, and fixing their financial messes. I learned their ledgers inside and out. I knew where every dime went. And because I knew the math, I slowly began to realize that Chemo's final lesson was echoing right in front of my face. The numbers my father reported did not match the lifestyle they lived. The breaking point did not arrive with a shouting match. It arrived with a dinner invitation. 3 weeks before that courtroom showdown, my mother did something she had not done in 5 years. She called my phone and offered to buy me a luxury seafood dinner at a Waikiki resort. She sounded warm. She sounded eager. I should have known that in my family, an unexpected meal is never a gift. It is always a trap. I walked into that restaurant expecting a rare moment of connection. Instead, I walked straight into an extortion attempt that would force me to stop fixing their mistakes and start auditing their lies. The escalation began exactly 3 weeks before that fateful morning in the courtroom. It started with a text message on a Tuesday afternoon. The notification popped up on my phone screen while I was reviewing tax returns for a local bakery. My mother's name illuminated the glass. "We would like to take you to dinner on Friday. A nice place in Waikiki. Please wear something appropriate." I stared at those sentences for a long time. My parents had not purchased a meal for me in 5 years. They did not invite me to dinners. When holidays rolled around, I was expected to arrive after the main course was served to help clear the plates. A sudden invitation to an upscale resort restaurant felt less like an olive branch and more like a baited hook. Still, a foolish, quiet part of my heart hoped they had simply missed their daughter. That foolish part of me was about to receive a permanent education. Friday evening arrived with heavy humidity and the scent of salt in the air. I drove my rusted sedan down Kalakaua Avenue, fighting through the dense tourist traffic. I pulled into the valet circle of a towering oceanfront hotel. I handed my keys to the attendant, ignoring his judgmental glance at my peeling paint, and walked into the grand lobby. The restaurant sat on a terrace overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Tiki torches flickered against the twilight. Soft Hawaiian slack-key guitar music drifted through the dining room. I found my parents seated at a corner table with a pristine view of the water. My father wore a crisp linen shirt. My mother wore her signature pearls and a silk dress. They looked like the perfect wealthy island couple. I approached the table wearing a simple tailored skirt and a modest blouse. I took my seat. My father offered a tight, practiced smile. He signaled the waiter and ordered a bottle of imported wine that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. When the waiter turned to me, I asked for a glass of sparkling water. We engaged in hollow pleasantries for exactly 10 minutes. My father talked about a new golf course development. My mother complained about the humidity ruining her hair. They did not ask about my accounting business. They did not ask about my life. The air above the white tablecloth felt thick with unsaid demands. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water and waited for the illusion to drop. It happened right after the waiter poured their wine. My father reached down to the floor beside his chair. He lifted a thick, heavy leather briefcase and set it directly on the table, pushing aside the breadbasket. He snapped the brass locks open. He pulled out a dense stack of legal documents held together by a heavy binder clip and slid them across the linen surface until they stopped inches from my water glass. I looked down at the bold black letters printed across the top page: Commercial Loan Agreement and Promissory Note. My father folded his hands over his empty plate. His tone shifted from casual dinner host to demanding executive. "Lauren needs your help," he dictated. He did not phrase it as a question. He stated it as an obligation. My sister had spent the last 2 years running a luxury wellness retreat on the island of Maui. She funded the venture using my parents' connections and an absurd amount of institutional leverage. Lauren knew nothing about operating margins, payroll taxes, or seasonal revenue dips. She only knew how to select expensive bamboo flooring and imported crystal healing beds. Her retreat is facing a temporary cash flow issue, my mother chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. The bank is being terribly unreasonable about a few missed payments. They are threatening foreclosure. I kept my hands resting in my lap. I did not touch the paperwork yet. "How much is the debt?" I asked, my voice flat and clinical. My father cleared his throat, adjusting his linen collar. $2.4 million. The number hung in the humid air. They were sitting at a table eating fresh oysters, asking their scapegoat daughter to swallow a $2.4 million anchor. "We need your signature as a cosigner," my father continued, tapping a manicured finger against the stack of paper. You live like a monk, Marley. You have zero debt. Your credit score is pristine. The bank will approve the loan restructuring immediately if your name is on the guarantor line. I finally reached out and opened the folder. My parents assumed I was just a quiet girl who fixed their petty bookkeeping errors. They forgot I was a certified financial auditor. I read numbers the way musicians read sheet music. I skimmed the first 3 pages of the proposed agreement. It took me less than 40 seconds to spot the fatal architecture of the contract. The financials were a death trap. The interest rate was predatory. The terms included a joint and several liability clause. That meant if Lauren missed a single payment on her doomed wellness retreat, the bank would not just seize her bamboo floors. They would come directly after me. They could garnish my wages, freeze my accounts, and legally claim every dollar I ever earned for the rest of my life. My parents were asking me to sign my own financial death warrant so my sister could pretend to be a successful entrepreneur for a few more months. My mother leaned across the table. Her pearls clicked against the edge of the wood. "Family takes care of family, Marley," she murmured. Her smile was tight, strained at the corners. "It is the least you can do. You owe us for putting a roof over your head all those years." I stared at her. I thought about the years I spent working 3 jobs, sleeping 4 hours a night, scrubbing grease off my uniform just to pay for my own textbooks. I thought about the brand new luxury car they parked in the driveway for Lauren while I walked to the bus stop in the pouring rain. I owed them nothing. The roof they provided had always felt more like a cage than a home. I closed the loan document. I squared the edges of the paper with precise, deliberate movements. I slid the heavy stack back across the white tablecloth until it bumped against my father's wine glass. I looked directly into his eyes. No. It was a single syllable. I had never spoken it to them before. For 24 years, my responses had always been yes, or okay, or I will handle it. The word hovered over the table, disrupting the quiet hum of the restaurant. My father blinked. He stared at the return documents, his brain struggling to process the rejection. "Excuse me?" he rasped, his voice dropping into a dangerous, gravelly register. "I will not sign this," I said, keeping my posture rigid and my tone devoid of emotion. "The debt-to-income ratio is fatal. The revenue projections are fictional. Lauren is going to default, and when she does, this contract gives the bank the right to liquidate my entire life to cover her failure. I am not setting myself on fire to keep your golden child warm." The facade shattered. The wealthy, polite island patriarch vanished. My father's face turned a deep, dangerous shade of purple. The veins in his neck bulged against his collar. He stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the hardwood deck. Several diners at nearby tables turned their heads, their forks hovering in midair. "You ungrateful, selfish girl," he hissed, leaning over the table, his shadow falling across my face. "We gave you everything. You are nothing without this family. You are a glorified calculator." My mother covered her mouth with her hand, performing shock for the onlookers. "Thomas, please, people are staring," she whispered. He ignored her. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his leather wallet, and extracted a crumpled $20 bill. He threw it fiercely onto my empty porcelain plate. "Pay for your water and get out of my sight," he sneered. "If you walk away from this table, I will make sure you regret it. I will ruin you in this town. You will have nothing." I looked at the crumpled bill resting on the pristine white plate. I looked at the man who cared more about a failing business venture than his own flesh and blood. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my simple skirt. I did not take the money. I walked away from the table. I moved through the elegant dining room, past the flickering tiki torches and the whispering tourists. I kept my spine straight and my chin lifted. I stepped out into the warm Hawaiian night and handed my ticket to the valet. As I drove my rusted car back toward the North Shore, listening to the rhythmic hum of the tires against the pavement, my hands finally stopped shaking. The war had officially begun. I knew my father was a man of his word when it came to vengeance. He promised to ruin me, and he controlled the very ground I slept on. I lived in a small, rundown cottage on the edge of their sprawling Haleiwa estate. By the time the sun rose the next morning, I knew the illusion of safety would be over. The retaliation was coming fast and ruthless, aiming to strip away the only sanctuary I had left. The drive from Waikiki back to the North Shore takes just over an hour, leaving far too much time for a person to think. The cottage sat on the extreme northern edge of my parents' estate, obscured by a dense line of banyan trees. It used to be a dilapidated groundskeeper shed, featuring a caving roof and rusted pipes. 4 years ago, I asked my father if I could restore it. He laughed, handed me the keys, and placed a bet with my mother that I would quit within a week. I spent my weekends patching holes, laying laminate flooring, and sealing the drafty windows. I painted the exterior a crisp, clean white. I turned a neglected shack into a home. It was small, but it was mine, or so I believed. That is the ultimate danger of building a sanctuary on someone else's dirt. The retaliation did not take days to arrive. It took mere hours. The sun had not yet crested the Ko'olau Mountains when a jarring noise dragged me out of a deep sleep. A sharp crack of splintering wood echoed through the thin walls, followed by the heavy thud of boots marching across my front porch. I threw off my blanket, my pulse drumming a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I pulled on a sweater, walked to the entryway, and opened the front door. 2 strangers in gray work shirts were hauling my living room armchair down the steps. A third man emerged from my kitchen carrying a cardboard box brimming with my pots and pans. He tossed it onto the dewy grass. The ceramic plates inside shattered upon impact, a bright, startling sound in the quiet dawn. "Keep it moving," a voice commanded from the yard. "We want this place cleared before noon." My mother stood at the bottom of the wooden steps. Barbara wore a pristine white tennis skirt and a matching visor, holding a clipboard like she was organizing a charity auction. She pointed a manicured finger toward my bedroom window, instructing a fourth man to start emptying the closets. The cold efficiency of a mother throwing out her own child was a staggering thing to witness. I stepped onto the porch barefoot. The morning chill bit at my skin. I looked directly at her. "What are you doing?" My father marched up the gravel driveway before she could answer. Thomas held a single sheet of paper in his right fist. He did not look like the man who had just shared a seafood dinner with his daughter the night before. His jaw was set tight, unforgiving, and rigid. He thrust the paper toward my chest. 3-day notice, he stated, his tone stripped of any parental warmth. "You refused to help your sister. You turned your back on us. If you do not want to support this family, then you do not live on our land." I glanced at the paper. It was a generic eviction form, hastily printed from the internet. The blank spaces filled in with his sharp, jagged handwriting. My mind, trained in financial and legal compliance, instantly recognized the flaw. A typed notice for a family member residing in an established dwelling held 0 legal weight. To remove me properly, he would need to file a formal detainer, wait for a court date, and secure a judge's order. It would take months. He knew the law. He also knew I lacked the immediate cash reserves to hire an attorney and drag him into a drawn-out civil dispute over a tiny cottage. He was betting on my exhaustion. He expected me to panic and beg. Another loud crash drew my attention away from the paper. One of the hired haulers had dragged out a heavy plastic tote bin from my home office. He lost his grip near the railing, the bin hit the bottom step, and burst open. My breath caught in my throat. Those were not just reading books. They were Chemo's original shipping ledgers. The brittle yellowed pages spilled across the damp lawn. The ocean breeze caught a loose manifest from a decade prior, tumbling it toward the dirt road. These were the documents that taught me how numbers worked, the very records my grandfather had trusted me to decipher. I rushed down the wooden steps. I fell to my knees in the wet grass, gathering the fragile pages, shielding them against my chest to protect the ink from the morning dew. "Leave the trash," Barbara instructed the worker, stepping carefully around a scattered pile of my winter sweaters. "Focus on the heavy furniture. Get the mattress out next." I knelt there, gripping Chemo's ledgers tight, and lifted my gaze toward the main house. The grand estate loomed over the property, casting a long, dark shadow across the yard. Up on the second-story balcony, leaning against the wrought iron railing, stood Lauren. She wore a silk robe, both hands wrapped around a steaming ceramic coffee mug. She watched the workers toss my belongings into a growing heap near the driveway. When our eyes met, she did not look away or feign innocence. She offered a slow, deliberate smirk, then took a sip of her coffee. She was enjoying the performance. She had manufactured a financial crisis, drained her own business dry, and now she was watching her parents punish the only person who refused to subsidize her failure. A weaker version of myself would have screamed. A more impulsive woman would have threatened to call the police, waved the illegal eviction notice in Thomas's face, and demanded her rights as a tenant. I did none of those things. Screaming requires energy, and I needed every single ounce of my focus for the war ahead. I stood up. I brushed the wet dirt from my bare knees. I placed Chemo's ledgers safely into the trunk of my faded sedan, locking it securely. "I need heavy-duty trash bags," I said, my voice eerily level. My father frowned, clearly thrown by the lack of hysterics. He expected pleading tears. Instead, he got a blank stare. He gestured to one of the workers who handed me a roll of thick, black plastic bags. I spent the next hour packing. I did not fold anything. I stuffed my clothing, my shoes, my remaining financial files, and my laptop into the bags. I dragged them across the yard and shoved them into the back seat of my car until the rear suspension groaned under the weight. I left the furniture behind. The armchair, the bed frame, the dining table. They were just wood and fabric. They meant nothing to me. Barbara watched me the entire time, her arms crossed, waiting for a tear, a plea, a break in my composure. I gave her nothing but silence. When the car was full, I slammed the trunk shut. I walked up to my father, who was standing near the porch, hands resting on his hips. "You made your choice, Marley," he declared, trying to assert dominance over a departure he could no longer control. I looked at him, truly registering the smallness of his character in the morning light. "I did," I replied. I turned around, climbed into the driver's seat, and turned the ignition. The engine sputtered, then caught. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the Haleiwa estate, the tires crunching loudly over the gravel. I did not glance in the rearview mirror. I drove south, leaving the lush green coastline behind. The morning traffic hummed along the highway. My hands gripped the steering wheel, slick with nervous sweat, but my mind was operating with cold, sharp clarity. They believed they had broken me. They thought stripping away a roof and humiliating me in the grass would force me into submission. They assumed a daughter with a rusty car and a few trash bags of clothes was a defeated woman with no options left. I bypassed the expensive tourist hotels in Waikiki and drove toward the industrial sprawl near the airport. I found a cheap, unremarkable motel sitting directly beneath the roar of departing commercial flights. The neon vacancy sign buzzed in the daylight. I walked into the lobby and paid for a week in cash. The room smelled like stale smoke and industrial pine cleaner. The carpet was worn thin near the door. The bedspread featured a faded floral pattern from another decade. I dropped my bags on the floor and sat on the edge of the firm mattress. I was alone. The silence in that dingy room felt vast, heavy, and incredibly liberating. My parents had sought to render me homeless and helpless. Instead, they had given me the one thing I desperately required. They handed me total isolation. They gave me the quiet space I needed to finalize my plans without their constant surveillance. I opened my laptop, the battery indicator flashing low. I needed to check my freelance accounting portals, alert a few clients that my home office was undergoing a sudden relocation, and ensure my modest savings were secure for the upcoming weeks. I logged into my primary banking portal. The screen loaded the spinning icon, hesitating for a fraction of a second. When the dashboard appeared, the numbers stared back at me. Available balance, $0. Access denied. A red banner flashed across the top of the browser window. My childhood joint account, the one holding my entire emergency survival fund, was frozen. And as my phone buzzed with an incoming email from my largest local client demanding to know why I was abruptly shutting down my services, the true scope of their attack became crystal clear. My family was not just coming for my shelter. They were coming to erase my ability to survive. The walls of the motel room were paper thin. Every 20 minutes, a commercial airliner roared overhead, rattling the cheap landscape painting bolted above the bed. The air smelled of industrial bleach and old dust. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, resting my standard silver laptop on my knees. I needed to send a quick update to my local freelance accounting clients, assuring them that my services would continue uninterrupted despite my sudden change of address. I opened my browser and navigated to my primary cloud server. I typed my password. A harsh red error banner flashed across the screen. Invalid credentials. I frowned, cleared the field, and typed it again, slower this time. The same red banner appeared. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I switched tabs and opened my professional email dashboard. My inbox was flooded with confused replies and automated cancellation notices. I clicked on the sent folder. At 6 a.m, while I was loading trash bags into my trunk under my mother's supervision, a message had gone out to my entire client roster. I read the text, my pulse drumming a steady, heavy rhythm in my ears. Dear valued client, I am writing to inform you that I must suspend all accounting services effective immediately. I am currently experiencing a severe mental health crisis and cannot fulfill my professional obligations. Thank you for your past business. I stared at the glowing screen. The wording was surgical. It was designed to inflict maximum professional damage. Using a mental health crisis as a shield was brilliant in its cruelty. It meant that if I tried to contact those clients later to explain the truth, they would simply view my outreach as further proof of my instability. I knew instantly who had authored it. Lauren possessed a dangerous kind of cunning. I remembered a family gathering the previous Christmas. I had been sitting at the kitchen island reviewing end-of-year tax documents for a local client. Lauren had leaned over my shoulder to pour herself a glass of wine, lingering just long enough to watch my fingers move across the keyboard. She had memorized my master password. She did not stop at simply locking me out and destroying my reputation. I opened a reply from the owner of an Oahu hardware chain, my most lucrative local account. He expressed deep pity for my supposed breakdown. He then noted that a representative from Greg's consulting firm had conveniently reached out earlier that morning, offering to take over his quarterly audits to ensure his business did not suffer during my absence. Lauren had orchestrated a fabricated crisis, severed my income, and handed my best client directly to her husband on a silver platter. They were picking my livelihood apart like vultures. I closed the laptop. My freelance income was gone. I needed liquid capital immediately. I grabbed my purse, walked out into the humid Hawaiian heat, and drove my rusted sedan to the local bank branch down the highway. I held $8,000 in a childhood savings account. It was a joint setup my father had opened for me when I was 16. I had kept it active because my local freelance invoices were deposited there. It was the only financial footprint my parents knew about the perfect decoy to keep them from looking closer at my actual operations. I walked through the heavy glass doors and approached the teller window. The air conditioning inside the bank raised goosebumps on my arms. I handed my driver's license to the teller, a young woman with a polite smile and a gold name tag. I asked to withdraw the entire balance in cash in order to secure a new apartment deposit. She typed my name into her terminal. Her fingers paused over the keyboard. She read the screen, her brow furrowing deeply. She clicked her mouse twice, read a secondary prompt, then looked up at me. The polite smile had vanished, replaced by an expression of deep, uncomfortable pity. "I am sorry, Miss Dawson," she murmured, lowering her voice so the customers waiting in line behind me would not hear the humiliation in her tone. "The joint account has been frozen by the primary holder. No withdrawals are permitted at this time." I stood frozen on the polished tile. Frozen. Yes, ma'am. Thomas Dawson placed a strict administrative hold on the funds 2 hours ago. You will need to contact him directly to release the restriction. I cannot authorize dispensing even a single dollar until he lifts the hold. I took my driver's license back, my fingers brushing the cool plastic of the card. I thanked her, turned around, and walked out of the building. The automatic doors slid shut behind me, sealing off the quiet, secure hum of the bank. The tropical sun beat down on the asphalt parking lot, but I felt entirely cold. Homelessness was only their first strike. This was the siege. My parents were treating me like a hostile territory. They had evicted me from my home. Lauren had systematically destroyed my professional reputation and stolen my clients. Now Thomas had seized my last $8,000. The strategy was brutally transparent. They were cutting off my oxygen. They expected me to sit in a cheap motel room, watch my resources dwindle to zero, and surrender. They calculated that within a week, hunger and desperation would force me to crawl back to the Haleiwa estate. They expected me to knock on their heavy front door, apologize for my stubbornness, and sign Lauren's doomed loan agreement just to survive. I walked to my car and unlocked the door. I sat in the driver's seat, the vinyl upholstery burning through my slacks. I opened my wallet. I pulled out every paper bill I had and laid them on the passenger seat. 2 20s and 2 singles. $42. That was the entirety of the cash I possessed in my physical name. Anyone else might have broken down right there. Anyone else would have looked at those 4 crumpled bills and wept at the sheer cruelty of their own bloodline. The fear of starvation is a powerful motivator. My mother counted on that fear. She believed she had stripped me bare. I did not weep. I did not reach for my phone to beg for mercy or ask for my own money back. I stared at the $42 and felt a profound, crystal-clear wave of liberation wash over me. They had severed the final string. By taking everything they could see, they had freed me to use everything they could not see. I took a slow, deep breath. The humid air filled my lungs, smelling of salt water and hot pavement. I reached across the center console, opened the glove compartment, and pulled the trunk release lever. A soft, mechanical click echoed from the rear of the sedan. I stepped out of the car and walked to the back. I lifted the heavy trunk lid. The space was filled with the black trash bags holding my clothes and books, the chaotic remains of my physical life. I pushed them aside, exposing the worn felt carpeting lining the floor. I reached down and lifted a concealed panel near the spare tire well. Beneath the false floorboard lay a heavy, shock-proof tactical case. I unlatched the metal clasps and lifted the lid. Inside rested a sleek, matte black laptop. It bore no brand logos. It was not connected to any public cloud server or joint banking network. I pulled the machine from the case, carried it to the front seat, and shut the car doors. I rested the device on the steering wheel and powered it on. The boot sequence was silent. A black screen appeared requesting a biometric scan, followed by a rotating 16-digit encryption key. I pressed my thumb to the sensor. The screen glowed, illuminating the dark interior of the car and casting a sharp light across my face. My family treated me like a broken piece of furniture. They looked at my thrifted clothes and my rusty sedan and assumed I was a failure. They believed my entire net worth sat in a frozen bank account dictated by my father's whim. They believed they held all the power because they controlled the visible board. They had no idea I was about to log into my real life, the life I had built entirely in the dark. The interface loaded, displaying secure routing numbers, offshore Delaware, holding structures, and digital ledgers containing 8 figures of liquid capital. I was not a starving bookkeeper holding $42. I was the founder of Pacific Apex Group, and the people who just tried to bury me were about to find out who actually owned the shovel. The screen illuminates the interior of my rusted sedan. A soft blue glow washes over the worn upholstery and the cracked plastic dashboard. I type my 16-digit encryption key. The system hums, bypassing standard internet protocols, tunneling directly into a secure server housed 3,000 miles away. A dashboard materializes. Columns of green text display routing numbers offshore, holding accounts and active acquisition portfolios. The total liquid capital listed in the top right corner reads in the tens of millions. My family thought they had starved me out by freezing a childhood savings account. They had no idea they were throwing pebbles at a fortress. I am the founder and sole owner of Pacific Apex Group. For the past 8 years, while my mother paraded Lauren around charity galas and my father bragged at his private clubs, I funneled every spare dollar into the market. I did not buy new shoes. I did not upgrade my vehicle. I lived on discount ramen and tap water in cramped apartments with rattling air conditioners. I took my earnings from freelance auditing and started acquiring distressed commercial debt. I bought out failing logistics companies in the Midwest, restructured their operational inefficiencies, and sold them for staggering profits. I hid my identity behind layers of corporate LLCs registered in Delaware. Visibility is a liability when you share blood with people who view your success as their personal property. Sitting in the sweltering heat of the motel parking lot, I open a new search query. I bypass the general market data and pull up the municipal filings for Dawson Shipping. Chemo had built that fleet from a single fishing boat. He knew the name of every dock worker. He shook hands with his captains. He ran a clean, profitable ledger. I know this because I spent my teenage years studying those exact books. Now I am looking at the digital wreckage my father has created. I cross-reference the public commercial debt registries with the county tax records. Numbers are a universal language. They tell a story free of emotion and bias. The story unfolding on my screen is a tragedy of gross incompetence. Thomas Dawson has over-leveraged the entire shipping fleet. He has taken out high-interest mezzanine loans against the primary warehouses in Honolulu. The interest rates hover near 20%. Default triggers are baked into every clause. He has borrowed against the commercial fishing vessels. He has even mortgaged the Haleiwa estate, the very land he stood on when he handed me a fake eviction notice. I trace the outflow of capital. The money is not going toward vessel maintenance or employee benefits. It is bleeding directly into a separate corporate entity registered on the island of Maui, Lauren's Wellness Retreat. My father is draining Chemo's legacy dry to prop up a failing vanity project. He is letting a profitable shipping fleet drown just so his golden child can continue pretending she is a successful entrepreneur. The betrayal settles deep in my chest. It replaces the lingering sting of the morning with a cold, sharp focus. This is no longer just about my shelter. This is about protecting my grandfather's life work from parasites. I pick up my secure mobile device. I dial a Dallas area code. The line rings twice before my corporate proxy answers. His name is Donovan. He is a senior partner at a lethal corporate litigation firm in Texas. He serves as the public face of Pacific Apex Group, executing my directives while insulating me from public scrutiny. He answers with a crisp greeting. "We are initiating a hostile takeover," I tell him. My voice is steady, echoing slightly in the confined space of my car. "I want you to target the secondary debt market. Look at the primary creditors holding the paper on Dawson Shipping. They are currently holding several toxic, high-interest loans. I want Pacific Apex Group to acquire all of it." I hear the rapid clicking of a keyboard on the other end of the line. Donovan pulls up the portfolio. "They are highly over-leveraged, Marley," he states. "The risk profile is severe. The current lenders will be thrilled to offload this debt, but we will have to pay a premium to bypass the standard waiting periods. Pay the premium I instruct. I do not care about the upfront cost. Sweep the board. Buy the commercial loans, the equipment leases, and the primary lines of credit. I want to own every single cent of Thomas Dawson's financial existence by the end of the week." Donovan does not hesitate. His tone shifts into the cold, mechanical cadence of a corporate executioner. "Consider the paper signed. We will execute the transfers through the shell accounts. He will not even know his debt has been sold until we decide to turn the lights out." I end the call and set the phone on the passenger seat. The corporate machinery moves with surgical precision. Over the next 48 hours, encrypted wire transfers flow from my offshore accounts into the banking institutions holding my father's debt. The banks, eager to clear non-performing assets from their ledgers before the end of the fiscal quarter, accept the premium buyouts without question. The paperwork clears regulatory hurdles seamlessly. By Thursday evening, the digital dashboard on my laptop flashes a green confirmation banner. The acquisition is complete. The flickering neon vacancy sign outside casts a harsh pink light across the laminate desk in my room. I sit in the dark, watching the glow of the screen. Pacific Apex Group is now the sole primary creditor for the Dawson family empire. I hold the master deeds to the Honolulu warehouses. I own the leases on the shipping fleet. I hold the paper on the sprawling Haleiwa estate. Thomas Dawson does not own the walls around him. He does not own the ground beneath his expensive shoes. He is a tenant in my kingdom. My parents do not know my name is at the top of the holding company. They only receive a formal notification from their bank stating that their debt portfolio has been sold to a ruthless private equity firm. The shift in leverage changes the atmosphere in their home immediately. The local banks stop returning my father's calls. His credit lines freeze. The comfortable cushion of elite privilege evaporates overnight. They realize unknown sharks are circling their sinking ship. The sudden financial pressure creates a vacuum of panic. When people who have spent their entire lives relying on the illusion of wealth feel the ground crumble, they abandon logic. They scramble for a lifeline. They look for someone else to absorb the impact. Thomas and Barbara realize they are running out of time. Lauren realizes her wellness retreat is days away from total collapse. They are desperate. Desperate people abandon strategy and act on pure impulse. They stop thinking clearly and start looking for an easy target to extort. They assume the quiet, homeless daughter living out of her car is still the weakest link in their chain. They believe a few fabricated threats will force me to surrender. They have no idea they are walking straight into the jaws of a predator they built with their own cruelty. The first desperate move does not come from my father. It comes from the man who lives on his payroll, seeking to prove his worth by attempting to blackmail the wrong woman. Financial pressure behaves exactly like water. It always flows downhill, seeking the path of least resistance, looking for the lowest point to flood. When Pacific Apex Group acquired the debt portfolio of Dawson Shipping and froze the primary credit lines, the water began rushing through my family's pristine estate. My father felt the sudden, terrifying grip of insolvency. He turned around and transferred that panic to my sister. Lauren, facing the imminent collapse of her Maui wellness retreat, poured that identical panic directly onto her husband. Greg was a man who possessed expensive tastes and zero personal capital. He had married into the Dawson family for the lifestyle securing a comfortable existence, funded entirely by my father's credit cards. He drove a luxury sports utility vehicle he did not own, wore tailored suits he did not purchase, and spent his afternoons networking at golf courses where someone else paid the monthly dues. With the credit line severed, Greg's comfortable ride was screeching to a halt. He needed cash, and he needed his wife's business loan secured. He decided the easiest way to solve his problem was to extort the woman he believed was sleeping in a broken-down car. It happened on a Tuesday morning. I sat at a small, unassuming coffee shop near the airport. It was a local spot, far removed from the polished tourist districts of Waikiki, smelling of dark roasted beans and damp ocean air. I sat in a corner booth reviewing encrypted digital files on my secure laptop. My cellular phone rested face down on the scratched laminate table. The bell above the entrance chimed. Greg walked through the door. He wore a crisp linen shirt and expensive sunglasses tucked into his collar. He scanned the room, his eyes skipping over the mechanics and baggage handlers grabbing their morning caffeine, until his gaze landed on me. He sauntered over to my booth, projecting the unearned swagger of a man who believed he held every winning card. He slid into the vinyl seat across from me. He did not say hello. He did not order a drink. He reached inside his jacket, pulled out a thick manila envelope and tossed it onto the table. It landed with a dull smack next to my coffee mug. "You look tired, Marley," Greg said, leaning back and crossing his arms. "Living out of a suitcase, taking a toll." I kept my hands resting lightly on my keyboard. I did not close my laptop, merely dimmed the screen with a swift keystroke to hide the offshore routing numbers. "What do you want, Greg?" He gestured toward the envelope. "Take a look. Thomas wanted me to deliver the good news personally. I picked up the envelope and lifted the unsealed flap. I pulled out a stack of high-resolution glossy photographs. I spread them across the table. The images showed the Haleiwa cottage, the sanctuary I had spent 4 years restoring with my own blistered hands. The front windows were shattered, jagged shards of glass covering the porch. The interior drywall, the walls I had patched and painted a pristine white, were covered in gaping, jagged holes, as if someone had taken a sledgehammer to every single room. The copper plumbing pipes in the kitchen had been ripped from the fixtures, leaving dark water stains pooling across the laminate floor I had installed myself. The place was a ruin. They had destroyed their own guest house. I stared at the photographs, feeling a profound, icy calm settle over my ribs. A lesser opponent would have shattered the property in a fit of genuine rage. But this damage was deliberate. It was staged. "You left the place in ruins, Marley," Greg smirked, leaning forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Thomas is filing a police report for vandalism this afternoon. Felony property damage." I looked up from the photos. "I left that cottage spotless." "That is not what the pictures show," Greg replied, his tone dripping with mock sympathy. "And considering Lauren sent out that unfortunate email about your sudden mental health crisis, the authorities are going to look at these photos and see a deeply unstable woman who destroyed her parents' property in a fit of homeless rage after a lawful eviction." He smiled. It was an ugly, predatory expression. He thought he had me cornered. He thought he had engineered a flawless trap. "Here is the deal," Greg offered, dropping his voice into a conspiratorial whisper. "You sign Lauren's commercial loan document as a co-signer. You secure the debt. If you do that, I will talk Thomas down. I will convince him to drop the criminal charges. You stay out of a jail cell, and we all move on." I studied his face. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated with the thrill of his own perceived brilliance. He genuinely believed he was executing a masterful corporate shakedown. "Let me ensure I understand your proposal," I said, my voice smooth and hollow. "You want me to sign a multi-million-dollar financial liability to save Lauren's failing business. In exchange, my father will not file a fabricated police report using staged photographs." "Exactly." Greg nodded, pleased that I was summarizing his terms so neatly. "But there is one more thing." He reached out and tapped a single manicured finger against the table. "I am spending a lot of time managing Thomas right now," Greg stated. "Keeping him away from the precinct requires effort. I want $50,000 for my silence, a personal consulting fee paid in cash directly to me." He was drowning. The sudden freeze on the family credit accounts had left him entirely broke, and he was using his father-in-law's extortion plot to carve out a secret payday for himself. He was betraying everyone at once. $50,000, I repeated softly. "Consider it the cost of doing business." Greg smiled, leaning back again. "You sign the loan, you pay my fee, and you get to keep your freedom. Refuse, and the police will be at your motel by dinner. It is a very simple choice, Marley." I looked at the photographs of the ruined drywall. I looked at the man wearing a shirt paid for by a shipping company he did not understand. Then I looked at my cellular phone resting face down on the table between us. I reached out and picked the device up. I tapped the screen once. A bright red recording icon vanished. The screen displayed an audio file measuring exactly 4 minutes and 12 seconds. I saved the file, automatically syncing the pristine, uncompressed audio directly to my secure offshore cloud server. "You are right, Greg," I said, sliding the phone into my pocket. "It is a very simple choice." I stood up from the vinyl booth. I retrieved a crisp $5 bill from my wallet and dropped it onto the table to cover the cost of my coffee. I picked up my laptop and slid it into my leather tote. Greg frowned, his arrogant posture faltering. "Where are you going? We have not finalized the agreement." "We finalized everything," I replied, looking down at him with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a trapped insect. "You just delivered a flawless, fully recorded confession of criminal extortion and blackmail. You outlined the forged police report, demanded a specific financial payout, and explicitly threatened my freedom to secure a signature. The audio is incredibly clear. The color drained out of Greg's face, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. His jaw slackened. The smirk vanished entirely. He stared at the spot where my phone had been resting, his brain struggling to process the catastrophic error he had just committed. You recorded me," he stammered, his voice cracking into a high, breathless pitch. "I always keep a record," I stated, "and I strongly advise you to inform Thomas that if a single police officer approaches my door regarding that cottage, I will hand this audio file directly to the county prosecutor. Extortion carries a severe mandatory sentence in this state." I turned my back on him. I pushed open the glass door and walked out into the bright Hawaiian sunlight. I did not look over my shoulder. I left him sitting alone in the booth, staring at the scattered photographs of a ruined house, realizing he had just handed the keys to his own jail cell to the woman he came to destroy. I drove my rusted sedan back to the airport motel. The humid wind rushed through the open windows. The immediate threat of a fabricated arrest warrant was neutralized. Greg would run back to the estate terrified of his own shadow and force my father to abandon the police report scheme. They would retreat, nursing their wounded pride, trying to formulate a new angle of attack. But as I sat in the quiet of my dingy motel room, the glossy photographs Greg had dropped on the table kept flashing through my mind. The image of the shattered plumbing and the pulverized drywall bothered me. It was not the emotional sting of seeing my hard work erased. It was the financial illogic of the act itself. Thomas Dawson was a man who worshipped assets. He valued property above human beings. He was currently experiencing a severe liquidity crisis, drowning in high-interest mezzanine debt. A man in that precarious financial position does not destroy an income-producing structure on his own land simply to frame a daughter he has already evicted. It is a waste of capital. It is reckless. Unless the desperation ran far deeper than a few frozen credit lines. If my father was willing to commit felony fraud and destroy his own real estate to secure a loan signature, he was hiding a catastrophic failure somewhere else in his ledger. He was panicking. I opened my tactical case and retrieved my secure laptop. I booted the system, ran my thumb across the biometric scanner, and tunneled back into the private equity dashboard. Pacific Apex Group now held the master deeds and the full operational ledgers for Dawson Shipping. I had the raw data for every transaction my father had authorized over the past decade. I opened the primary shipping manifests and began cross-referencing the outbound cash flow against the operational budget. I ignored the fuel costs, the maintenance fees, and the maritime insurance premiums. I started looking for the rot. I spent 4 hours tracing encrypted wire transfers through a labyrinth of corporate shell accounts. The numbers danced across the screen, telling a story of profound, unyielding greed. Then, just after 2 p.m, I found the gap. It was hidden deep within the quarterly payroll allocations, buried under layers of fabricated administrative fees. It was not a missing invoice or a delayed client payment. It was a gaping, bleeding wound located directly inside the Dawson Shipping Employee Pension Fund. The digital clock on the motel nightstand clicked to 3 a.m. Outside, a late commercial flight roared over the roof, rattling the cheap landscape painting bolted to the wall. I did not look away from my screen. The blue light cast harsh shadows across the cramped room, illuminating the dense spreadsheets glowing on my encrypted laptop. I had neutralized Greg's extortion attempt at the coffee shop, but the staged photographs of the ruined cottage kept flashing through my mind. Thomas Dawson worshipped real estate. He valued property above human beings. A man in his precarious financial position does not shatter the drywall of an income-producing structure on his own land simply to frame a daughter he has already evicted. It is a waste of capital. It is a desperate, reckless gamble. If my father was willing to commit felony fraud and destroy his own asset to secure my signature on Lauren's loan, he was hiding a fatal failure somewhere else in his ledger. He was drowning, and he needed my pristine credit score to act as a life raft before the water reached his chin. I opened the primary shipping manifest for Dawson Shipping. Pacific Apex Group now held the master deeds and the full operational ledgers. I possessed the raw data for every transaction my father had authorized over the past decade. I spent 4 hours tracing encrypted wire transfers through a labyrinth of corporate shell accounts. Numbers are a universal language. They strip away the designer suits, the country club smiles, and the arrogant dinner table speeches. They reveal the raw, unvarnished truth of human behavior. I ignored the fuel costs, the maintenance fees, and the maritime insurance premiums. I bypassed the high-interest mezzanine loans. I looked for the rot. Just before dawn, I found the gap. It was buried deep within the quarterly payroll allocations, hidden under layers of fabricated administrative fees and phantom consulting retainers. It was not a missing invoice. It was not a delayed client payment. It was a gaping, bleeding wound located directly inside the Dawson Shipping Employee Pension Fund. I leaned closer to the screen, my breath catching in my throat. I ran the diagnostic software again, assuming I had made a calculation error. The software confirmed the findings within seconds. Over the last 2 years, Thomas Dawson had authorized 84 separate wire transfers, each carefully structured just below the federal reporting threshold. He pulled the capital directly from the retirement accounts of his own warehouse workers, forklift operators, and cargo captains. He routed the stolen funds through a holding company registered in Delaware. From Delaware, the money flowed straight into a private commercial account on the island of Maui, the exact account tied to Lauren's failing wellness retreat. I stared at the glowing numbers until my eyes burned. The total sum siphoned from the workers' futures equaled $1.2 million. It was not poor business management. It was federal wire fraud. It was systemic embezzlement. My father and mother had robbed their own hardworking employees to fund their golden child's vanity project. They had drained the retirement savings of men and women who lifted heavy crates in the tropical heat, all so Lauren could install imported bamboo flooring and crystal healing beds in a resort she did not know how to run. The betrayal settled deep in my chest, replacing the lingering sting of my eviction with a sharp, lethal focus. I closed my eyes and pictured my grandfather. Chemo built that shipping fleet from a single rusted fishing boat. He knew the name of every single dock worker on his payroll. He knew their wives' names. He knew whose kids were applying for college. I remembered sitting in his humid office when I was 10 years old, watching him hand a thick envelope of cash to a cargo driver whose roof had caved in during a severe tropical storm. Chemo operated with honor. His word was his bond, and he treated his crew like an extension of his own family. Thomas and Barbara had desecrated his legacy. They had turned a proud, honest fleet into a personal piggy bank, stealing the security of the exact people Chemo had sworn to protect. I pushed my chair back from the laminate desk. I stood up and walked to the small motel sink, splashing cold water on my face. The girl who desperately wanted her parents to love her was gone. The daughter who worked 3 jobs and fixed their tax errors for free was dead. I dried my face with a scratchy white towel. I was the chief executive officer of Pacific Apex Group, and I was going to dismantle the Dawson family brick by brick. When the sun rose, I left the motel and drove to a local office supply store on the highway. I walked through the quiet aisles and purchased a heavy-duty navy blue binder, a box of clear sheet protectors, a set of numbered dividers, and a red pen. I paid in cash. I drove to a secure printing center downtown. I connected my encrypted drive to their isolated network and hit print. I stood by the tray as the pages slid out hot and smelling of fresh toner. I printed the IP logs confirming the transfers originated from my father's private home office router. I printed the forged authorization signatures. I printed the routing numbers proving the direct pipeline between the hard-working sailors' pensions and Lauren's luxury Maui resort. I returned to my room, spread the documents across the sagging bedspread, and went to work. I organized the evidence with the clinical detachment of a trauma surgeon triaging a wound. Tab 1 held the original pension balances. Tab 2 held the fraudulent Delaware Shell Company incorporation papers. Tab 3 contained the 84 distinct wire transfers. Tab 4 held the receiving receipts from Lauren's business accounts. I labeled every single page with the red pen. I dated every instance of theft. This was no longer a simple real estate foreclosure. Evicting them from the Haleiwa estate and seizing their commercial warehouses would only leave them broke. That was an insufficient consequence for stealing $1 million from innocent families. I was going to hand Thomas, Barbara, and Lauren directly over to the federal authorities. I was going to ensure they traded their country club memberships for prison uniforms. I closed the heavy covers of the navy binder. The metal rings snapped shut with a sharp, decisive click. I placed the binder inside my leather tote bag and set it next to the door. The weapon was fully loaded. I only needed the right target to aim it at. I did not have to wait long for the enemy to present themselves. That afternoon, my cellular phone vibrated on the desk. It was an email from a law firm I did not recognize sent directly to my professional freelance accounting address. The subject line read, "Urgent Notice of Mandatory Mediation." I opened the message. It was drafted by a man named Martin Sterling, a notorious local attorney known for crushing vulnerable tenants and executing ruthless corporate shakedowns. He represented Thomas and Barbara Dawson. The email outlined a formal demand. My parents had filed a civil lawsuit against me, officially claiming $150,000 in property damages for the vandalized guest cottage. The court required a mandatory mediation session before the case could proceed to trial. Sterling dictated the terms in sharp, threatening language. He stated that his clients were willing to drop the ruinous civil suit, provided I attended a sit-down meeting the following morning and signed a quiet settlement agreement. I read the email twice. I recognized the strategy instantly. They were bleeding cash. The shipping company debt was sold, their credit lines were frozen, and Lauren was facing imminent default. They needed capital, and they needed it immediately. They were dragging me into a sterile conference room, intending to use the fake police report and the staged photographs of the ruined cottage to bully me into signing away the final piece of Chemo's legacy. They wanted the last remaining mineral rights hidden in my grandfather's sealed trust. They believed they held the ultimate leverage. They thought the threat of a six-figure lawsuit and a criminal record would shatter my resolve and force my hand. I stared at the glowing screen, a cold smile touching the corners of my mouth. They wanted to sit across a table and discuss financial liabilities. They wanted to negotiate terms. I typed a single word in reply. Confirmed. I shut the laptop and looked at the navy blue binder resting inside my tote bag. Thomas and Barbara thought they were bringing a shark lawyer to a shakedown. They had no idea they were summoning me to their own public execution. The elevator doors opened onto the 20th floor of a high-rise in downtown Honolulu. The air conditioning in the lobby hit my skin like winter, a sharp contrast to the tropical heat baking the pavement outside. I walked past the reception desk and stepped toward Conference Room B. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass. I could see them before I even touched the handle. My father sat at the head of a long mahogany table. He wore a tailored suit, his hands resting flat on the polished wood. My mother sat beside him in a conservative beige dress, projecting the image of a weary, grieving parent. Next to my father sat Martin Sterling. Sterling was a notorious local attorney. He specialized in corporate shakedowns and intimidating vulnerable tenants. He wore a platinum watch and a predator's grin. He did not look like a man preparing for a negotiation. He looked like a man arriving to collect a debt. I opened the glass door and walked in. I wore a simple navy blazer and carried no briefcase, just my purse. I pulled out a chair directly across from Sterling and sat down. No one offered a greeting. The silence stretched, designed to make me squirm. I kept my posture straight and my breathing steady. Sterling broke the quiet. He unlatched his leather satchel. The brass clasps clicked loudly in the sterile room. He pulled out a thick stack of printed papers and slid them across the mahogany surface. They stopped mere inches from my hands. My clients have suffered severe financial injury due to your destructive actions, Sterling announced. His tone was polished, coated in legal authority. When you vacated the guest cottage, you engaged in a retaliatory campaign of vandalism. You smashed fixtures, tore holes in the drywall, and poured cement down the primary plumbing lines. I looked down at the documents resting in front of me. The scent of fresh printer toner hit the air. The invoices were pristine. No coffee stains, no folded corners, no signs of ever being handled by a real construction crew on a dusty job site. They were pristine documents generated from a cozy home office to execute a shakedown. I noted the date on the estimates. They were time-stamped the very morning my mother had hired the hauling crew. They had planned the vandalism before I even packed my trash bags. I hold here certified contractor estimates. Sterling continued tapping a manicured finger against the top page. They detail exactly $150,000 in deliberate property damage. We are prepared to file a sweeping civil suit by close of business today. We will also submit these findings to the county prosecutor to pursue criminal mischief charges. I did not flinch. I did not rush to defend myself. I looked at the top invoice. The header displayed a company logo, Pacific Island Contracting. I recognized the business entity immediately. I had audited local tax records for years. Pacific Island Contracting was a shell company registered to Greg, my sister's husband. They had destroyed their own guest house, hired their own son-in-law to generate a fake repair invoice, and were now using that fabricated bill to extort me in a formal legal setting. My father leaned back in his chair. A smug, triumphant grin spread across his face. He watched me intently, waiting for the panic to set in. He expected the struggling bookkeeper who survived on a meager salary to shatter under the threat of a six-figure lawsuit and a criminal record. However, my clients are generous people, Sterling said, his voice softening into a feigned register of compromise. They wish to avoid the public spectacle of sending their own daughter to prison. We will bury these invoices. We will drop the eviction notice and the civil suit entirely. Sterling reached into his satchel one more time. He produced a single sheet of heavy legal paper and slid it next to the fake invoices. In exchange, Sterling stated, "You will sign this permanent quitclaim deed. You will surrender your grandfather's subterranean mineral rights to Thomas Dawson." There it was. The trap snapped shut. This meeting had nothing to do with a ruined cottage or a bruised ego. My father was drowning in commercial debt. His shipping fleet was failing. He needed liquid capital, and he needed it fast. Chemo's mineral rights were the last untouched asset in our family lineage. My grandfather had left those rights solely in my name to protect them from my father's reckless spending. Thomas wanted to steal that legacy to secure a new bridge loan for himself. They had cornered me with forged evidence, demanding a generational fortune in exchange for my freedom. I looked at the quitclaim deed. I read the fine print. I did not pick up the pen resting beside it. "I reject the settlement," I said calmly. Sterling frowned. His predatory instincts flared. He let out a harsh, dismissive scoff. "You cannot afford a lawyer, Miss Dawson. If you force us to litigate this, we will drag you through the courts until you are destitute. You will lose. Your wages will be garnished for the rest of your life. You will never recover from the financial ruin." My mother leaned forward. The fabric of her beige dress rustled against the leather chair. She reached across the table, her hand hovering just above mine, her manicured nails catching the harsh fluorescent lighting. Her eyes swam with unshed tears, a flawless performance for the attorney sitting beside her. She had spent decades perfecting that specific look of maternal sorrow. It was the same look she used when telling the neighbors why I was not invited to family holidays. "Just sign it, Marley," she whispered. Her voice dripped with fake, suffocating pity. "Please, do not make us destroy you." I studied the woman who gave birth to me. She was willing to watch me go to jail. She was willing to bankrupt me. She was willing to assist in federal fraud, all to maintain her comfortable lifestyle and protect her golden child's failing business. I did not feel anger. I felt the cold, clinical detachment of a scientist observing a dying specimen. I placed my hands flat on the mahogany table and pushed my chair back. I stood up. The fabric of my navy blazer settled into place. I looked directly into my father's eyes, bypassing the shark lawyer entirely. "You want my signature, Thomas?" I asked, my voice dropping to a deathly quiet register that commanded the entire room. You want me to sell Chemo's legacy, to save a man who threw my belongings into the dirt? My father's face flushed a dangerous shade of red. He opened his mouth to shout, to exert his usual dominance, but I did not give him the space to speak. I looked at Sterling. You should verify your client's claims before you threaten people in a recorded mediation session. Pacific Island Contracting is owned by Greg. Your clients are presenting fraudulent invoices to coerce a signature on a property deed. That is extortion. Sterling stiffened. He glanced quickly at my father, a flicker of genuine unease crossing his features. Thomas had clearly concealed the shell company ownership from his own legal counsel. I buttoned my coat. Let them take me to court, I said, looking at my mother one final time. File the lawsuit. Submit your fake invoices to a judge. I want a public record of your lies. I want every person on this island to see exactly what you are. I turned my back on them and walked toward the glass doors. You are making a catastrophic mistake, Sterling barked behind me. His voice echoed sharply in the sterile room. I pushed through the heavy door and stepped out into the hallway. I did not look back. The heat of the street felt like a physical weight pressing down on my shoulders. I walked toward my parked sedan with a steady, rhythmic stride. The traffic on King Street hummed a low, constant drone. I unlocked my car and slid into the driver's seat. The vinyl upholstery burned through my slacks, grounding me in the present moment. I gripped the steering wheel, letting the sheer absurdity of the mediation session wash over me. I had survived the ambush. I had called their bluff, but I knew my family. A cornered predator does not retreat gracefully. When a narcissist loses control in a private room, they inevitably escalate the warfare to a public stage. They realize the legal route might require actual proof they did not possess. If they could not break me with a forged contract, they would try to break my spirit by destroying my name. They would pivot from legal extortion to a scorched earth social campaign. My mother ran the local charity committees. My father held court at the most exclusive establishments on the island. They controlled the narrative among the elite. They were going to weaponize that influence. They were going to ensure that every business owner, every former friend, and every neighbor believed I was a dangerous, unstable threat. The isolation tactics were about to escalate into a full public execution. The elite circles of Oahu were small, and gossip acted like wildfire. The real battle for my reputation was just beginning, and the first flames would be lit inside the gilded walls of the local yacht club. Living on an island teaches you a hard lesson about geography. When you belong to the right family, Oahu feels like a sprawling paradise with endless open doors and welcoming smiles. When you cross the wrong family, the shores close in, the roads shrink, and the entire island compresses into a single, suffocating room. My parents left that glass-walled mediation suite knowing their extortion attempt had failed. They knew the forged repair invoices from Greg's shell company would not hold up to legal scrutiny. They recognized that I was not going to hand over my grandfather's mineral rights quietly. A cornered opponent has two choices. They can surrender, or they can flip the board. My mother, a woman who had spent decades curating her social standing among the island elite, chose to flip the board. If she could not break me in a private room, she would destroy me in a public one. The Oahu Yacht Club hosted its annual spring gala 2 days after our mediation. It was the premier social event of the season, a gathering of shipping executives, hotel developers, and local politicians. My parents had maintained a prime table near the floor-to-ceiling windows for 20 years. I did not attend. I sat in my motel room under the flight path, listening to the roar of commercial jets descending toward the runway. But I knew exactly what was happening at that gala, because by the following morning, the fallout reached my phone. The first call came at 9. The caller ID showed the name of a woman named Rachel. She owned a chain of boutique gift shops across the island and had been one of my most reliable freelance accounting clients for 3 years. When I answered, her voice carried a tight, strained quality. She hemmed and hawed, talking about a sudden budget shift and a need to restructure her vendor contracts. I let her stumble through the corporate excuses for a minute before I stopped her. I told her I understood, but her tone told a different story. I stayed silent on the line, letting the quiet stretch. People abhor a vacuum, especially when they feel guilty. Rachel lowered her voice to a whisper. "Marley, your mother pulled me aside last night near the bar. She was crying. She asked me to pray for you." I kept my breathing steady. "What did she say, Rachel?" Rachel relayed the script Barbara had crafted. It was a masterclass in character assassination, delivered with the perfect performance of a grieving, desperate parent. My mother told the gala attendees I had developed a severe addiction to prescription painkillers. She claimed the addiction had spiraled out of control, leading me to steal cash from a safe in my father's home office to fund the habit. She spun a tragic narrative about a gifted girl who had simply lost her grip on reality, forcing her heartbroken parents to evict her for her own good. I listened to the lies form a tight, logical web. The strategy was brilliant in its cruelty. A theft explained why I was abruptly kicked out of the guest cottage. An addiction explained why I was acting erratic and refusing to sign my sister's commercial loan. Mental instability preemptively discredited anything I might say if I actually dared to take them to court. Barbara was poisoning the well. If I stood before a judge or spoke to the police, the local community would already view me as an unreliable, tragic figure, lashing out at the family who tried to save her. "I am sorry, Marley," Rachel whispered, "but I have to protect my business. I cannot have someone with those kinds of struggles handling my ledgers." "Thank you for letting me know, Rachel," I said, keeping my voice smooth and professional. "I will send over your final files this afternoon." My calm response seemed to unnerve her. An addict caught in a lie usually argues or begs. I did neither. I simply ended the call. 2 hours later, a restaurant manager I handled payroll for sent a brief email terminating our arrangement. I opened my social media applications and discovered that several women I had known since middle school had blocked my profile. The Whisper Network had done its job. The rumors spread through the country club, the local boutiques, and the neighborhood associations. If I walked into a grocery store in my hometown, people would look at me with a mixture of pity and revulsion. I walked into the cramped motel bathroom and gripped the edges of the porcelain sink. The isolation hit me as an actual physical weight pressing against my ribs. They wanted me to feel the walls closing in. They wanted me to look around and realize that without their protection, I was an outcast, a pariah, with no future and no friends. The goal was to break my spirit before the court date. They hoped the shame would force me to default, abandon the lawsuit, and disappear into the shadows where they had always kept me. I looked at my reflection in the spotted mirror. I remembered sitting in my grandfather's humid office at the docks. Chemo used to trace his calloused finger down a column of numbers and tell me that the loudest person in a room is rarely the one holding the truth. Military strategists understand a fundamental reality about warfare. An enemy who makes too much noise is an enemy who is deeply afraid. My mother was not spreading these rumors from a place of strength. She was screaming into a crowded room because she knew the extortion had failed. She was overcompensating because Thomas knew his credit lines were frozen and Greg knew his shell company was exposed. They were throwing smoke to cover their retreat. I turned away from the mirror. I walked past the unmade bed and sat at the cheap laminate desk. I opened my shock-proof tactical case and booted up the secure laptop. The screen cast a cool blue light across my face, reflecting the offshore routing numbers and the Delaware holding structures. I brought up the Pacific Apex Group dashboard. It was time to stop playing defense. I picked up my encrypted phone and dialed the Dallas area code. Donovan answered on the first ring, his voice crisp and ready for instruction. "We are shifting the schedule," I told him, my tone stripped of any hesitation. "Accelerate the timeline. No more waiting for the end of the fiscal quarter." I heard the rapid clicking of his keyboard. "You want to move on the Dawson portfolio now?" Today, I confirmed, Thomas Dawson missed his initial grace period payments on the commercial paper when we froze his credit lines. Standard procedure dictates we send polite reminders and drag the process out over several months. Skip the reminders. Draft the formal notices of default. Donovan paused reviewing the files. That is a heavy strike, Marley. We hold the master deeds to the shipping warehouses, the Haleiwa estate, and the commercial maritime leases. If we drop the hammer unannounced, it triggers an immediate demand for the full loan balances. They do not have the liquid capital to cure a default of that size. That is the point, I said. If we serve these papers on a Friday morning, Donovan noted, his voice carrying the cold logic of a corporate litigator, it locks up their entire weekend. The banks will be closed, their lawyers will be out of the office, they will spend 48 hours staring at the paperwork with no ability to file a response or secure emergency funding. It is an administrative nightmare for them. Print the default warnings, I instructed, ignoring the hum of a departing jet rattling the motel window. I want them printed, verified, and ready for physical delivery by Friday morning. Serve Thomas at the shipping headquarters. Serve Barbara at the Haleiwa estate. Serve Lauren at her wellness retreat in Maui. Hit all 3 targets simultaneously. Consider it done, Donovan replied. The process servers will be at their doors by 9 o'clock Friday. I ended the call and closed the laptop. The quiet of the motel room wrapped around me, but it no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a command center. My mother had spent her evening drinking vintage wine, wearing her best pearls, and convincing the island elite that her eldest daughter was a broken, desperate tragedy. She believed she controlled the board because she controlled the gossip. She thought she could dictate my worth by turning my hometown against me. What she did not realize was the full extent of the debt portfolio Pacific Apex Group had acquired. Chemo's original business included more than just cargo ships and warehouses. It included commercial docks and a highly lucrative private maritime lease. My father had leveraged that exact waterfront property to secure a line of credit years ago, and I had purchased that paper along with the rest of his failing empire. Let them drink champagne at the yacht club. I owned the marina. Panic has a distinct scent. In the corporate world, it smells like rushed emails, sudden liquidations, and skipped legal steps. When Pacific Apex Group acquired the debt portfolio of Dawson Shipping and froze the primary credit lines, my family felt that panic settle into their bones. My father watched his shipping empire suffocate. Greg realized his extortion attempt at the coffee shop had failed. But the true desperation belonged to Lauren. Her luxury wellness retreat on Maui was days away from a catastrophic default. The bank was preparing to seize the property. Lauren had spent her entire life insulated from failure. When she wrecked her first car, my father simply bought her a new one. When she performed poorly in private school, my mother charmed the headmaster into adjusting her grades. Lauren viewed consequences as a minor inconvenience that applied only to other people. She lived in a curated bubble where her desires dictated reality. Faced with the imminent loss of her status, she did not look for a legitimate business solution. She looked for the fastest possible payout. She targeted a specific plot of land in Kailua. Chemo bought the Kailua parcel in the late 70s. It was a pristine stretch of untouched coastline, far removed from the crowded tourist traps, where the sand was stark white and the water turned a deep, clear turquoise. He used to take me there on Sunday mornings when I was a girl. We would sit on the tailgate of his rusted truck, eating shaved ice and watching the tide roll in. He told me he kept that land empty because some things in this world hold far more value than the concrete you can pour over them. He placed the parcel directly into my sealed trust, specifically to ensure my father could never pave it over for a quick profit. Lauren knew the land existed. She also knew it was worth millions to the right buyer. She found a foreign investor eager to acquire prime Hawaiian beachfront property. They offered an all-cash deal, sight unseen, provided the transaction could close quickly. The investor did not care about the family dynamics. They only cared about the title. To secure that cash, Lauren needed a clean deed transfer. She needed the authorization of the trust's sole beneficiary. She needed my signature. She did not call to ask for it. She assumed I was thoroughly crushed by the yacht club smear campaign our mother had orchestrated. In Lauren's mind, I was a disgraced pariah, crying in a cheap motel room entirely isolated from the local business community. She believed I was too distracted by the pain of my own eviction to notice a quiet real estate transaction happening in the background. She decided to forge my name. To pull off a sale of that magnitude without triggering immediate legal alarms, Lauren needed an accomplice who understood the loopholes of local property law. She turned to Martin Sterling. Sterling was supposed to be a brilliant, untouchable attorney. He projected an aura of supreme confidence in mediation rooms. But greedy lawyers often make sloppy mistakes when desperate clients promise them a hefty percentage of a silent sale. Sterling allowed Lauren to bypass the standard rigorous title insurance checks. He processed the transaction through his firm's private escrow accounts. It was designed to be a shadow transfer. Sterling intended to hold the foreign investor's cash in his escrow, execute the deed transfer quietly with the county, and disperse the funds to Lauren before the public registry could update. They planned to take the money and let the foreign developer bulldoze Chemo's land before I ever realized the parcel was gone. It was a ruthless, highly coordinated theft. There was only one problem. 5 years ago, when I first took control of Pacific Apex Group, I registered a permanent digital monitor with the county clerk's office. The automated system flagged any legal filings, inquiries, or deed transfers involving my legal name, Chemo's old business entities, or the trust itself. It was a basic security measure, the kind of digital tripwire any competent financial auditor sets up to protect their assets. The alert arrived on a Thursday morning. I was sitting at the small laminate desk in my motel room, drinking a cup of bitter instant coffee. The commercial jets roared overhead, vibrating the thin glass of the window. My encrypted phone chimed a sharp, distinct notification tone. I opened the screen. An email from the county clerk's automated registry sat at the top of my inbox. Subject, preliminary deed transfer filing. I set my coffee mug down. The air conditioner hummed in the corner of the room, but the sound seemed to fade into a dull static. I logged into the secure municipal portal and downloaded the attached PDF document. It was a commercial transfer of deed for the Kailua beachfront parcel. The buyer was listed as an overseas holding company. The sale price was staggering. The escrow agent managing the routing was Martin Sterling. I scrolled down to the bottom of the 4th page. Resting on the final signature line in black ink was my name. I zoomed in on the digital scan, studying the pen strokes. It was a clumsy, arrogant forgery. My actual signature is sharp-angled and highly structured, a byproduct of signing thousands of complex audit reports over the years. The signature staring back at me on the screen was round and looping. The pressure was too even. The letters leaned slightly to the left. Lauren had likely traced it from an old high school birthday card she dug out of a drawer. She had copied the letters without understanding the rhythm of the hand that wrote them. She had walked into Sterling's law office, looked him in the eye, and signed her sister's name to steal a multi-million-dollar inheritance. I sat back in the cheap motel chair and let the cold, hard reality of the document settle into my mind. My sister did not merely attempt to steal a piece of land. She committed real estate fraud. She committed identity theft. By using Sterling's digital escrow accounts to route the foreign funds, she committed federal wire fraud. These were not civil family disputes over hurt feelings. These were felonies. Lauren had spent her entire life believing the rules did not apply to her. She thought she could rewrite legal ownership the same way she rewrote her own history. She assumed a quiet, obedient sister would never hire a forensic investigator to check the paperwork. I picked up my secure phone and dialed Donovan in Dallas. He answered on the second ring. I did not offer a greeting. Pull the incoming county clerk filings for the Kailua parcel, I instructed. My voice carried the flat, surgical tone of an executioner reading a ledger. Secure the metadata. Lock the timestamps. I heard the rapid clatter of his keyboard through the receiver. 10 seconds passed. Then the typing stopped. Donovan exhaled a slow, heavy breath. She forged your signature on a notarized deed, Marley, he said, his professional composure slipping just a fraction. She routed the transaction through Sterling's private escrow to bypass the title delays. This is not just a breach of contract. This is a severe federal crime. Download every page, I told him. Lock the encrypted files in our primary servers. Ensure we have a pristine digital chain of custody. Donovan cleared his throat. You hold the keys to her freedom right now. If we forward this to the state prosecutor, Lauren is facing serious prison time. Sterling will lose his law license and face identical charges for facilitating the escrow fraud. We are not calling the prosecutor today, I replied. I looked at the forged signature glowing on my laptop screen. Let the transaction sit in the pending file I instructed. Do not block the escrow transfer yet. Let them believe the sale is moving forward. They are building a narrative for the courtroom. I want them to walk into that trial believing they hold all the cards. I want Sterling to stand in front of a judge and demand my eviction while sitting on a forged deed. Donovan understood the strategy immediately. Give them enough rope to hang themselves in public, he murmured. Exactly. I ended the call. Lauren had wrapped her own arrest warrant in a neat bow and handed it directly to me. She thought she was saving her failed business. She was actually digging a grave for the entire family facade. I did not need to scream at her. I did not need to send an angry text message or demand a confession. I simply needed to print a hard copy of that forged deed, place it inside my red folder, and wait for the judge to ask for opening statements. I opened the portable printer I kept in my tactical case. The machine whirred to life, feeding a crisp sheet of white paper through the rollers. The forged signature printed perfectly, stark and undeniable. I placed the document behind the pension embezzlement logs. The trap was fully loaded. The jaws were ready to snap shut. But my parents were not finished fighting. They realized the yacht club rumors were not enough to force my surrender. The social isolation had failed to break my spirit. They needed a physical barrier between me and the family. They needed to ensure that when the court date arrived, the judge would look at me and see a dangerous, unhinged threat, rather than a competent financial auditor. As I closed the metal rings of the red folder, heavy footsteps echoed on the concrete walkway outside my motel room. The sound cut through the noise of the highway traffic. A sharp, authoritative knock hit my door. It was a solid, commanding rhythm that rattled the cheap wood in its frame. It was not the motel manager asking about checkout times. I stood up, smoothed the front of my shirt, and walked to the peephole. Standing on the exterior walkway was a uniformed Honolulu County sheriff, his hand resting casually near his duty belt. He was holding a thick stack of legal papers, preparing to serve me with a document that would attempt to paint me as a violent, stalking criminal. The air inside the motel room felt stagnant, thick with the scent of old carpet and salt spray drifting in from the highway. 2 days remained until the trial. I sat at the scratched laminate desk organizing the red folder. I verified the timestamps on the offshore routing numbers. I checked the printed copy of the forged Kailua land deed. Every document sat in chronological order, forming a steel trap waiting to snap shut. My phone rested silent on the mattress. No missed calls from my mother, no taunting texts from Lauren. The silence felt heavy, layered with unsaid threats. They had failed to extort me in the mediation room. They had failed to destroy my professional network because I no longer relied on local freelance clients. They had failed to cash out my grandfather's land because the escrow sat frozen under my digital monitor. They were running out of options. A sharp, commanding knock rattled the thin wooden door of my room. The sound did not belong to the housekeeping staff. It carried the distinct, firm rhythm of law enforcement. I closed the red folder, pushed my chair back, and walked across the worn carpet. I checked the peephole. A man in a tan uniform stood on the exterior walkway. A gold badge caught the morning sunlight. A Honolulu County sheriff. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. The humid breeze swept inside. "Marley Dawson?" he asked. His tone held no warmth. It was flat, practiced, and cautious. His right hand rested near his utility belt. "Yes," I replied, keeping my posture relaxed and my hands visible. He stepped back half a pace, creating a tactical distance, and held out a thick stack of legal documents clamped together with a heavy binder clip. "I am serving you with a temporary restraining order," the sheriff stated. "Effective immediately. You are mandated by the court to remain 500 feet away from Thomas Dawson, Barbara Dawson, and Lauren Dawson. You are prohibited from contacting them via phone, email, or third-party intermediaries. You are banned from approaching the Haleiwa estate or any associated commercial properties." I looked at the thick stack of papers in his extended hand. This was their next move. I did not gasp. I did not step back or shake my head in frantic denial. I reached out and took the documents. The paper felt heavy, loaded with desperate lies. The sheriff watched my face closely. He expected the typical reaction. People served with sudden restraining orders usually shout. They demand an explanation. They curse the names of the people who filed the petition. They try to convince the officer standing on the porch that a terrible error has occurred. I gave him none of that. I offered a polite, concise nod. "I understand," I said. "Thank you for doing your job, officer." He blinked, clearly thrown by the lack of theatrics. He handed me a carbon copy receipt sheet and a pen. "I need your signature acknowledging service." I signed my name with smooth, even strokes. I handed the pen back. I wished him a safe shift and closed the door, sliding the deadbolt back into place. I walked over to the desk and dropped the stack of papers under the harsh glow of the motel lamp. I flipped past the judge's signature on the cover page and turned straight to the sworn affidavits. If my family wanted a restraining order granted on an emergency basis without a preliminary hearing, they needed to demonstrate an immediate, credible threat to their physical safety. They needed to swear under penalty of perjury that I was dangerous. I read my father's statement first. Thomas claimed I had been prowling outside the perimeter of the Haleiwa estate in the middle of the night. He wrote that he had seen my rusted sedan idling near the front gates on 3 separate occasions, accelerating away whenever he turned on the security floodlights. I turned the page. My mother's affidavit followed. Barbara swore that I had left a series of unhinged, threatening voicemails on her personal phone. She claimed I demanded money and promised to burn their social standing to the ground if they did not pay me. She stated she felt terrified to leave her own house, fearing I might ambush her in the driveway. The final statement belonged to Lauren. My sister wrote a vivid, fabricated account of me confronting her in a grocery store parking lot. She claimed I had screamed at her, grabbed her arm, and threatened to ruin her Maui wellness retreat out of pure, spiteful jealousy. I sat back in the cheap chair and let the sheer scale of their fabrication sink in. It was a brilliant, terrifying strategy. It was a pure intimidation tactic, designed to shatter my credibility before the eviction trial even began. When I walked into that courtroom on Thursday morning, the judge would not see a wronged tenant or a competent financial auditor. The judge would look at the docket and see a woman slapped with an emergency restraining order. They would see a daughter deemed so unstable and menacing that law enforcement had to intervene. My parents were poisoning the well. They wanted to bias the bench, ensuring that whatever defense I offered against their fake property damage invoices would be dismissed as the rambling excuses of a disturbed stalker. They wanted to put me on the defensive. They expected me to spend the entire trial frantically trying to prove I was sane, leaving me no time to expose their actual crimes. A quiet hum vibrated through the floorboards as another jet took off from the nearby runway. I looked at the signatures at the bottom of each affidavit. Thomas, Barbara, Lauren. They had signed their names on official court documents, swearing to events that never took place. They had fabricated dates, invented encounters, and lied to a sitting judge. I did not reach for my phone. I did not dial my father's number to scream into the receiver, violating the court order and handing them the exact volatile reaction they desired. I did not pace the room or pull at my hair. Instead, I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out a 3-hole punch. I lined up the edges of the restraining order documents. I pressed the lever down, punching 3 perfect, clean circles through the thick paper. I opened my red folder. I bypassed the offshore routing numbers. I skipped past the pension embezzlement logs. I lifted the printed copy of Lauren's forged real estate deed. I placed the restraining order and the perjured affidavits right at the back of the stack. I snapped the metal rings shut. My family thought the justice system was a toy they could wind up and aim at whoever inconvenienced them. They viewed the courts the same way they viewed the country club, a place where wealth status and a well-rehearsed performance always won the day. They thought they could weaponize the law against the weak. They forgot one crucial, undeniable detail. The justice system operates on documented proof. It requires receipts. To prove I had been prowling around their estate at night, they would need security footage they did not possess. To prove I had left threatening voicemails, they would need audio recordings that did not exist. To prove I had ambushed Lauren in a parking lot, they would need witnesses who were never there. Meanwhile, to prove my father stole from his workers, I had bank routing numbers. To prove my sister committed real estate fraud, I had a digital copy of her forged signature on a deed transfer. To prove my mother orchestrated a fake vandalism claim, I had Greg's recorded confession. They brought fiction to a battlefield built on facts. I closed the red folder and ran my hand over the smooth cover. They had just handed me another weapon. Filing a false police report and submitting perjured affidavits to a judge were serious offenses. When the truth surfaced, the court would not just dismiss the restraining order. The judge would look at the people who lied to secure it and see exactly what I had seen for decades. The waiting was almost over. The isolation in the motel room, the quiet preparations, it all narrowed down to the next 48 hours. I packed the folder securely into my bag. I laid out my tailored navy suit for the trial. I set my alarm for dawn. I was ready to face them. But as the trial morning arrived, bringing a suffocating wave of tropical humidity across the island, the final, desperate attempts to derail my presence began before I even crossed the courthouse threshold. My family realized the restraining order had not forced my surrender. They knew I was coming, and a cornered opponent always launches one last frantic strike right outside the arena gates. The morning of the trial broke with the kind of suffocating humidity that makes the air feel thick inside your lungs. The Hawaiian sun beat down on the concrete steps of the Honolulu courthouse, casting a harsh, blinding glare across the plaza. Palm trees stood motionless in the stagnant air. Tourists down the street walked in bright floral shirts, oblivious to the fact that I was marching toward a legal execution. I wore a simple, tailored navy suit. I carried no purse, no briefcase, no oversized designer handbag. I held nothing but a single red folder. Inside those 3 metal rings sat the culmination of a decade of silence, patience, and precise forensic accounting. Chemo's original shipping ledgers, the offshore routing numbers, the printed copy of Lauren's forged land deed, the transcript of an extortion attempt. The rigid spine of the folder pressed solid against my side. Climbing the wide stone steps, I focused on the steady rhythm of my shoes hitting the pavement. One step for the college tuition they diverted. Another step for the illegal eviction from my cottage. Another for the frozen bank account that was supposed to starve me into submission. I was not the frightened 24-year-old girl they threw into the dirt. I was the founder and chief executive officer of Pacific Apex Group, and I was walking into a public forum to dismantle the very people who tried to bury me. I reached the wide plaza just outside the main security checkpoint. The heavy glass doors of the courthouse loomed ahead, offering the promise of air conditioning and sterile protocol. Before I could grasp the polished brass handle, a figure lunged from behind a stone pillar blocking my path. Greg. He did not look like the slick, arrogant consultant who had tossed a manila envelope onto my cafe table just days prior. The smugness from the coffee shop was gone. His expensive linen shirt clung to his chest, stained dark with sweat under the arms. Deep, bruised circles hung beneath his bloodshot eyes. His breathing was shallow, rapid, and uneven. He looked like a man who had spent the entire night watching his fabricated reality dissolve into ash. He reached out his hand trembling and grabbed my elbow. His grip was tight, his fingers digging into the wool of my navy sleeve. "Marley, listen to me," he hissed. His voice dropped to a frantic, raspy whisper, his eyes darting toward the security guards stationed just inside the glass doors. "Lauren is out of money. The bank is calling today. They are initiating the seizure protocols by 5 o'clock. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then lifted my gaze to meet his panic. "Just give up," Greg pleaded, his breath smelling of stale espresso and raw fear. "Sign over the mineral rights and we can all walk away. We will drop the civil suit. We will pull the restraining order. Nobody has to go in there today. Just sign the paper, Marley, and we let this go." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I slowly pulled my arm out of his grip, smoothing the fabric of my sleeve with calculated precision. He was drowning, and he was begging the woman he tried to blackmail to hand him a life raft. "You should check your voicemail, Greg," I whispered. He blinked. The frantic, nervous energy paused for a fraction of a second. Confusion washed over his pale face, his brow furrowing as his brain struggled to process the instruction. I had sent the crisp, uncompressed audio file of his extortion attempt to his personal cellular phone 30 minutes ago. Attached to the audio file was a single note detailing the precise, mandatory sentencing guidelines for felony blackmail in the state of Hawaii. He had not listened to it yet, but the trap was already resting in his pocket. Before Greg could reach into his jacket to retrieve his phone, heavy footsteps approached from our right. My father, Thomas, marched across the plaza toward the security line. He wore his finest custom suit, the dark wool tailored to project unyielding wealth and unquestionable authority. He adjusted his silk tie, his chin lifted high. He did not notice his son-in-law's crumbling composure. He only saw his estranged daughter standing near the entrance, holding a mere plastic folder. Thomas stopped 2 feet away from me. He curled his lip into a deep, familiar sneer. It was the exact same expression he wore when he stood on the porch of the guest cottage and waved a fake eviction notice in my face. "Ready to be homeless permanently, Marley?" he asked, his tone dripping with arrogant certainty. He expected me to lower my head. He believed the perjured restraining order and the threat of a 6-figure judgment had me terrified. He thought I was standing outside the doors because I lacked the courage to walk inside and face the judge. I looked at the man who shared my DNA. I studied the graying hair at his temples and the arrogant set of his jaw. I did not blink. I didn't break my stride. I stepped around him, leaving him standing next to a son-in-law who was mere moments away from realizing he was headed for a federal prison cell. I pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped into the crisp, chilled air of the courthouse lobby. I placed my red folder into the gray plastic bin at the metal detector. It glided along the conveyor belt, passing through the X-ray machine, emerging on the other side, untouched. I picked it up, nodded a polite thanks to the uniformed security guard, and walked toward the elevators. The third-floor corridor smelled of lemon floor wax and old polished wood. The muted sounds of legal conversations echoed down the hall. I pushed open the heavy double doors of courtroom 4B. The gallery sat half full. I recognized the audience immediately. Several local real estate developers occupied the back row. Members of my mother's exclusive yacht club circle filled the middle benches. Barbara had spent the entire week spreading her toxic narrative across the island, and now she had ensured her peers were present to witness the final, humiliating destruction of her ungrateful daughter. She wanted a crowd. She wanted applause. My family had already crossed the room and taken their seats at the plaintiff's table. They radiated arrogance, a united front of manufactured elite status. Barbara sat with perfect, rigid posture. She clutched a lace tissue in her right hand, her makeup flawless, fully prepared to perform the role of the heartbroken, victimized matriarch for the judge. Lauren sat beside her, looking exhausted, but attempting to project a smug, triumphant victory. She kept glancing at her phone, likely waiting for the bank's final foreclosure notice, assuming the mineral rights she planned to steal today would save her. At the head of their table sat Martin Sterling. The high-priced shark attorney was busy organizing his pristine, fabricated property damage invoices into neat, aligned stacks. He smoothed his expensive tie and offered my parents a reassuring nod. They looked like an impenetrable fortress of wealth and legal power. I walked down the center aisle. The hushed whispers in the gallery faded into a tense, heavy silence. I felt the collective weight of their judgmental stares tracking my movement, but I kept my spine straight. I approached the defense table on the opposite side of the room. I pulled out my chair. The wooden legs scraped against the polished linoleum floor, a sharp grinding sound that echoed off the high vaulted ceiling. I sat down. I sat at the defense table alone. I had no expensive defense attorney sitting beside me. I had no paralegal whispering advice into my ear. I had no supportive family members sitting in the front row of the gallery offering me reassuring smiles. I was entirely isolated. Sterling glanced over at my empty table and smirked. He leaned over and whispered something to my father. Thomas let out a short, dismissive breath, assuming my lack of legal counsel meant I was an easy, defenseless target. They thought my solitude was proof of my surrender. I placed the red folder in the exact center of the long wooden table. I folded my hands on top of the smooth plastic cover. They thought I was weak. They had no idea that sitting alone at that table, armed with nothing but the bedrock of absolute truth, made me the most dangerous person in the room. The trap was locked, the evidence was filed, and the judge was about to walk through the heavy wooden doors to ask for opening statements. The heavy wooden doors of courtroom 4B clicked shut, sealing the humid, tropical heat outside. The bailiff called the room to order. His voice echoed off the high vaulted ceiling, demanding silence from the packed gallery behind me. I sat alone at the defense table. My hands rested lightly on the smooth plastic cover of the single red folder. Judge Davies, a stern woman with silver hair pulled into a tight knot, adjusted her glasses and looked down at the docket. She glanced at my empty table, noting my lack of legal counsel, then turned her attention to the plaintiffs. Martin Sterling stood up. He smoothed his expensive silk tie and stepped out from behind the wooden table. He did not look like a man seeking justice in a court of law. He looked like an actor stepping onto a stage he owned. Your Honor, Sterling began projecting his voice so every country club friend in the back row could hear. We are here today to address a tragic, destructive situation. My clients, Thomas and Barbara Dawson, offered their daughter a place to live. They provided shelter. They offered unending parental support. In return, she engaged in a retaliatory campaign of vandalism. He paced in front of the jury box, his leather shoes squeaking faintly against the polished linoleum. He lifted a stack of printed papers, waving the fabricated invoices from Greg's Shell Company like a victorious flag. When requested to vacate the premises, the defendant shattered windows. She ripped copper plumbing from the walls. She destroyed the drywall of a historic guest cottage to punish the very people who fed and clothed her. We submit these contractor estimates detailing $150,000 in damages. We ask this court to grant the immediate eviction and enforce a judgment to make my clients whole. Sterling paused, letting the staggering numbers hang in the chilled air. He turned his head and offered me a smile, devoid of any warmth. He wanted me to cower. He wanted the gallery to see me shrink. Judge Davies reviewed the paperwork Sterling handed to the clerk. Her brow furrowed. She looked at me, her expression softening into something worse than anger. She offered me pity. She saw a troubled, destitute woman sitting alone, about to be crushed by a mountain of debt she could never repay. Does the plaintiff have any additional statements before we proceed? Judge Davies asked. My father stood. Thomas Dawson buttoned his charcoal suit jacket. He walked forward and gripped the edges of the wooden witness stand. He looked out at the gallery, ensuring his peers were paying close attention. He wanted the entire island elite to witness his triumph. He cleared his throat, performing the role of the exhausted patriarch. Your Honor, Thomas said, his tone dropping into a register of practiced, weary sorrow. We tried to help her. We truly did. We gave her every opportunity to succeed. But you can only do so much for someone who refuses to help herself. He turned his head and pointed a manicured finger directly at me. His eyes locked onto mine. The sorrow vanished, replaced by sheer, unfiltered arrogance. Look at her, Thomas sneered, his voice amplifying through the microphone. No degree, no job. She is the biggest mistake of our lives. A ripple of sound moved through the gallery. Muffled chuckles, polite, wealthy laughter from the women in the front row. Lauren sat beside my mother, covering a smirk behind her hand. Barbara sat tall, her chin lifted, soaking in the collective sympathy of her social circle. They had orchestrated the perfect humiliation. They expected the quiet, invisible daughter to lower her head, cry, and surrender her grandfather's legacy just to make the laughing stop. I did not shed a single tear. My pulse remained steady, beating a calm rhythm against my wrist. I remembered Chemo, sitting in his humid office, telling me that numbers never lie. I pushed my chair back. The wooden legs scraped against the floor. I stood up. I reached down and buttoned my plain navy blazer. "Does the defense have a statement?" Judge Davies asked, her voice gentle, clearly expecting me to offer a rambling, tearful apology. "Your Honor," I said. My voice rang clear and sharp, cutting through the lingering laughter in the room. "Before this goes any further, there is something my parents do not want you to know." The courtroom fell still. The whispering ceased. I reached down and flipped open the metal rings of the red folder. The sharp click echoed like a fired round. "My father just testified that I have no degree and no job," I stated, keeping my posture rigid. I retrieved the first stack of documents and walked toward the bailiff. "I hold a degree in corporate finance. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Pacific Apex Group." The gallery gasped. The sound of dozens of people inhaling sharply filled the room. Thomas stopped breathing. His hands remained gripping the wooden rail, but the color drained rapidly from his knuckles. As of last week, I continued handing the corporate acquisition records to the bailiff. Pacific Apex Group purchased the entire commercial debt portfolio of Dawson Shipping. We hold the master deeds to their Honolulu warehouses. We hold the paper on the Haleiwa estate. Thomas and Barbara Dawson are functionally bankrupt. Martin Sterling froze. He looked at my father, his eyes wide with rising panic. Thomas had never disclosed his financial ruin to his own attorney. "Your Honor," Sterling stammered, his polished demeanor cracking under the sudden shift in power. "This has no bearing on the property damage claims." "It has everything to do with their claims," I replied, turning to face the judge, "because desperate people fabricate evidence." I pulled the second stack of papers from the red folder. "The invoices Mr. Sterling just submitted are fraudulent. They were generated by Pacific Island Contracting, a shell company owned by Greg, my sister's husband. The damage to the cottage was staged by the plaintiffs." I handed a small digital drive to the clerk. "That drive contains a pristine audio recording of Greg demanding $50,000 and my signature on a commercial loan in exchange for dropping these fake charges. It is a recorded confession of extortion and blackmail." Barbara let out a sharp cry. She grabbed Thomas's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the fabric of his suit jacket, so hard her fingers trembled. Lauren's smirk vanished entirely. Her face turned a sickly shade of gray. She shrank back into her leather chair, trying to make herself as small as possible. "But the extortion was merely a symptom of a much deeper crime," I said, my voice carrying to the back row, where the yacht club elite sat in stunned, breathless silence. I retrieved the thickest section of the folder. "Thomas Dawson is currently facing an active federal investigation. These certified ledgers prove he embezzled $1.2 million from the Dawson Shipping Employee Pension Fund." Judge Davies dropped her pen. The wooden gavel clattered onto her mahogany desk. She stared at the routing numbers I had just entered into the official record, her judicial neutrality replaced by raw shock. "He siphoned the retirement savings of his own dock workers and routed the capital directly into a failing Maui wellness retreat owned by his daughter, Lauren Dawson." Chaos erupted in the gallery. Investors, neighbors, and supposed friends leaned forward, whispering frantically. The polished facade of the Dawson family shattered into a million jagged pieces under the harsh fluorescent lights. They were no longer the wealthy island titans. They were thieves who stole from the working class to fund their vanity. Sterling backed away from the plaintiff's table. He realized his clients had just confessed to multiple felonies on a recorded transcript. He reached for his leather briefcase, intending to withdraw from the case before the blast radius consumed his career. I turned my body and looked directly at the high-priced lawyer. "And Mr. Sterling," I said, dropping my tone into a lethal quiet register that froze him in his tracks, "you might want to check your private escrow accounts." Sterling stopped breathing. His jaw slackened. I pulled the final piece of paper from the red folder. It was the printed copy of the county clerk's filing. Yesterday afternoon, Lauren Dawson attempted to sell a prime beachfront parcel in Kailua to a foreign investor. That land belongs to a sealed trust established by my grandfather, Kimo. I am the sole beneficiary. I slid the document across the table. Lauren forged my signature on the transfer deed. She committed real estate fraud and identity theft. And she used your firm's private escrow accounts to bypass the standard title insurance protocols. Sterling stared at the paper. His platinum watch caught the light as his hands began to shake. By facilitating a fraudulent overseas wire transfer through his firm, he was instantly implicated in federal wire fraud. His law license, his reputation, his freedom, everything he valued was tied to the forged signature staring back at him. The silence in the room became unbearable. The air conditioning hummed, but nobody moved. The heavy stack of manila files Sterling had been holding slipped from his fingers. The folders hit the floor, spilling blank legal pads and useless printed case laws across the polished linoleum. He did not bend down to pick them up. He just stared at me, realizing exactly who I was. I was not the quiet, broken girl they could bully into submission. I was the architect of their ruin. Thomas sank into his chair. His chest heaved as he struggled to pull oxygen into his lungs. Barbara buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking, as the reality of their public destruction settled over her. Lauren stared blankly at the wall, her eyes vacant, processing the undeniable fact that she had just handed herself a felony conviction. I looked at the judge. She sat rigid, absorbing the staggering scale of the evidence resting on her bench. The pity she had shown me 10 minutes prior was gone, replaced by profound, unyielding respect. I closed the empty red folder. The metal rings clicked shut. The sound marked the end of the Dawson family empire. Judge Davies rested her hands on the polished mahogany bench. She stared at the forged land deed, then shifted her steady gaze to the pension withdrawal logs. The silence in the room felt thick, heavy with the undeniable weight of impending ruin. She did not ask for a recess. She did not request closing arguments. She picked up the heavy receiver of her desk phone and looked directly at the court clerk. "Contact the federal prosecutor's office," she instructed, her voice ringing with judicial finality. "Tell them to send an agent down here immediately. This court will not entertain fabricated civil claims designed to mask federal fraud." The sound of those words shifted the gravity in the room. The trap had not just closed, it had locked. Martin Sterling did not wait for a formal dismissal. A greedy lawyer knows exactly when the ship is going down, and he recognized the fatal flaw in his own escrow accounts. He knew the forged signature on the Kailua deed implicated his firm in a felony. His hands moved with frantic, jerky motions. He shoved his legal pads into his leather satchel and snapped the brass clasps shut. He did not whisper a goodbye to my parents. He did not offer a final piece of legal advice. He abandoned them at the plaintiff table, walking swiftly up the center aisle and pushing through the heavy oak doors to save his own law license. My father collapsed into his chair. Thomas clutched his chest, his fingers twisting the fabric of his custom suit. He gasped for air, his face turning a sickly, pale gray. The arrogant patriarch who had mocked my intelligence, who had treated his employees' retirement funds like a personal slush fund, was gone. He slumped forward, struggling to breathe, as the reality of a federal indictment crashed over him. My mother chose a different path. Barbara stood up her chair, scraping harshly against the linoleum. Her flawless makeup was ruined, her face twisted in a mask of pure, unfiltered panic. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger at me across the aisle. "You ruined this family," she screamed, her voice cracking in front of the silent gallery. "You destroyed your own flesh and blood." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to match her hysteria. I stood up from the defense table, smoothed the front of my tailored navy blazer, and looked her dead in the eye. "You ruined yourselves," I said, my tone as calm as a flatline. "I just brought the receipts." I turned my back on the plaintiff table. I walked up the center aisle, my steps measured and even. I passed the gallery rows filled with my mother's yacht club friends. The same wealthy socialites who had laughed at my father's cruel joke 20 minutes prior now refused to make eye contact. They stared down at their laps, suddenly desperate to distance themselves from the Dawson name. I pushed through the double doors and stepped out into the bright, tropical sunlight of the Honolulu Plaza. I took a deep breath. The humid air filled my lungs, and for the first time in 10 years, it felt entirely clean. The fallout over the next 3 months was swift, surgical, and devastating. Dawson Shipping went into Chapter 7 liquidation. The bankruptcy court appointed a receiver to dismantle the rotting framework of my father's empire. I used Pacific Apex Group to purchase the remaining viable commercial assets at a steep discount. I did not keep the profits. I immediately redirected the liquid capital to restore the stolen pension funds. I ensured every dock worker, every cargo captain, and every warehouse manager received their retirement savings back in full. Kimo had built that fleet by protecting his crew, and I honored his legacy by making those families whole again. The sprawling Haleiwa estate went into formal foreclosure. My holding company assumed the master deed. I did not show up at 6 a.m. with a hauling crew to throw their belongings onto the wet grass. I operated with the cold precision of the law. I authorized a standard legal 30-day eviction notice delivered by a county sheriff. Thomas and Barbara packed their suitcases in silence. They moved into a cramped, noisy rental unit near the airport flight path, the exact location where I had plotted their downfall. They currently sit in that small apartment, awaiting their federal sentencing dates for wire fraud and systemic embezzlement. Lauren's luxury Maui wellness retreat defaulted. The bank changed the locks on the bamboo doors and seized the crystal healing beds. She is currently barred from leaving the state, her passport confiscated, while she faces felony forgery charges for attempting to steal my grandfather's land. Greg sits in a county holding cell. His slick suits are gone. He spends his days attempting to negotiate a plea deal, using his recorded coffee shop extortion attempt as a desperate bargaining chip. They stripped me of my family, mocked my learning differences, and tried to erase my future. In the end, their own boundless greed erased them. Last Sunday, I drove out to the Kailua beachfront property. The drive along the coastal highway felt different this time. The windows were rolled down, the salt breeze tangling my hair. I parked near the edge of the tree line and walked out onto the pristine, untouched white sand. The water glowed a deep, vibrant turquoise rolling against the shore in a steady, rhythmic pulse. I did not build a grand mansion right away. I brought a canvas folding chair, sat near the water's edge, and listened to the ocean. I thought about Kimo, sitting in his humid dock office, tapping his thick finger against a paper ledger. Numbers never lie, he had told me. I thought about the years I spent wearing thrifted clothes, studying tax law on public buses, and building a financial fortress behind layers of Delaware shell companies. People often believe that strength requires volume. They think power is a loud speech at a holiday dinner, a brand new luxury car tied with a red bow, or a harsh threat delivered on a front porch. I learned a different truth. True power isn't loud. It doesn't need to mock people in a courtroom or perform for a crowd. True power is building your foundation in the dark. It is doing the quiet, unglamorous work of securing your own independence while everyone else underestimates you. You learn the rules, you keep the receipts, and you wait. So when the storm finally hits, when the people who were supposed to protect you try to tear your walls down, they discover too late that their weapons are useless, because you built your house on solid rock, and you are the only one left standing. Thank you for staying with me through this entire journey. If you have ever had to walk away from toxic relatives, if you know the quiet triumph of building your own success from the ground up, I want to hear your story. Drop a comment below and let this community know they are not alone. Please hit the like button, subscribe to Calm Drama Stories, and turn on notifications. Your support helps bring more stories of boundaries and dignity to light. Until next time, stay strong, stay quiet, and build your bedrock.